let's talk about the other big story coming out of DC today, and that, of course, is the Fed decision. We heard from Fed Chair Jerome Powell as well. Of course, the Fed left rates unchanged, near zero, repeating their vow to use all of its tools necessary. A couple of headlines out of the hearing today and out of the release earlier. They said they will maintain the range until the economy weathers recent events. They also went on to say that the economy's path will depend significantly on the course of the virus, and then, of course, that the health crisis poses medium-term economic risk. And Brian Cheung, I'd just love to get your thoughts just on the decision today, the market's reaction, and then, of course, where we go from here in terms of monetary policy.
Well, Shauna, as you mentioned, the big highlight from that policy statement where there really wasn't much change was the addition of that new sentence that says the path of the economy will depend significantly on the course of the virus. That's not new to July 29th. We had heard Chairman Powell say that in previous appearances on Capitol Hill in public speeches, but them codifying that in the statement really says something, and that's something that we got some color from Jay Powell in the press conference where he said, really, we can't say this enough, the Fed being, we cannot say that this is really an epidemiological problem before it is an economic problem. An interesting portion of his press conference where he said social distancing works hand in hand with ensuring a quick economic recovery. They're not separate things here. So really, it's an urgency, I guess, on the White House and on Congress's part to do more to make sure that the coronavirus cases don't continue to go up. We just got a news notification just a few minutes ago saying that the amount of deaths that have come in the United States from COVID-19 finally topped 150,000. That has well surpassed the death count in many other countries. So the Fed chairman saying here, we need to take care of that first before we start talking about an economic recovery. The reason why is because we've already seen the economic figures really show a slowing down in the economy. I think that's a big development that we heard from Chairman Powell today. He said, when you look at things like consumer confidence, you don't need to look to too many surveys to see things have kind of tapered off since the amount of cases have gone up in mid-June. If you look at credit card, debit card spending, things like business fixed investment, they're not necessarily looking as good as they did in the beginning parts of this recovery, let's say in the middle of May, as they did in late June, in early July. So that's something that we should expect to hear the Federal Reserve officials speak on more in the next few days and in the coming weeks. The idea that this is a really key inflection point, Chairman Powell calling it a new phase where we need to make sure we stop the virus to ensure that we can get that economic recovery.
Yeah, Brian, what's interesting, though, as well, is the fact that do you think investors were almost looking for more clarity just in terms of what the Fed is actually looking for? They made the case that they are going to keep rates as they are right now, but they didn't really provide any further information, just exactly as what it would take to change rates, did they?
Well, that's a great point that you bring up. In many ways, this press conference and this policy statement today was more about Main Street than it was about what the financial markets are doing. There wasn't really a bone that Chairman Powell threw to financial markets when it came to certainty in the future. One example being, at what point would the Federal Reserve raise rates? We heard back in the June FOMC that Chairman Powell wasn't even thinking about raising rates. He said today, we're not thinking about raising rates. If you want to claim that that's dovish, I'll leave that up to you. But regardless, Chairman Powell not offering any more clarity on at what point would the Federal Reserve lift off. Now, there are ways the Fed could do this. One example is more explicit forward guidance. This is something that we've seen based on the Fed minutes that have been discussed within those walls down on Constitution Ave. The discussion that we can say explicitly, we will not raise rates until the unemployment rate and or the inflation rate reaches a certain stated target. Now, the Fed, based on Chairman Powell's remarks today, is not anywhere close to announcing anything on that. In fact, actually, Chairman Powell said that's going to be a discussion for future meetings, plural, which implies that maybe we might not even get that in the next meeting in September. We might have to wait until November to get that. So nothing new for financial markets here. I actually had the chance to ask Chairman Powell a question on whether or not any sort of framework review, which the Fed was doing prior to COVID-19, wouldn't have to precede any sort of specific changes on explicit forward guidance. Chairman Powell saying, yes, we need to make sure we define exactly where we're looking at inflation before we change our approach to how we're going to lift off rates specifically with regards to COVID-19. So the Fed has a number of other hoops it needs to jump through before it can offer financial markets more certainty on its future path of policy.
And I would just add quickly, Brian, Powell brought up a number of times, once again, the idea that they have lending powers, not spending powers. Just seeing headlines in the last 2 minutes, Mark Meadows leaving Nancy Pelosi's office, saying there's nowhere near a deal on that enhanced unemployment insurance. And Powell was pretty explicit as it seems like he's ever going to be, that fiscal support from Congress. And he mentioned that inflection point. It seems like he's saying if there is no extension of the unemployment benefits, a re-upping of the CARES Act, we are going to be in a new phase, and suggesting that there's maybe more the Fed could do if that were the case.
Yeah, and we have heard from Fed Chairman Powell that fiscal policy is going to do more. They've already said that in previous meetings. That will definitely be something worth watching. But again, Chairman Powell saying UI and the types of support that were already offered did indeed help a lot of households get through the first parts of this crisis. But again, with the cases rising again, it really increases the onus. And I think that was what Chairman Powell was hinting at in his press conference, to get more fiscal policy in the near future.
And that certainly is interesting. And then, of course, Brian, when we get that GDP report out tomorrow morning, we'll almost get more clarity just in terms of the impact that the coronavirus has had on the U.S. economy in the second quarter. And then, of course, going forth, what we could expect in the second half of the year. And you have to imagine that print will weigh on the Fed's future policy decision, because we know it's going to be bad. We know it's not going to be anywhere near good news, but of course that will weigh on the Fed's decision going forward.